Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. I was recently watching the show Yellowstone, and what did I see but a beautiful quilt. The quilt shows up 2 times. The first time is the bunkhouse. It's very easy to miss, but the second time is not easy to miss at all. It is right here. I will insert a picture. So Beth is wearing this quilt in a couple scenes, and I thought, why not try and recreate this quilt? I think it's classic, it's beautiful. I don't have the exact fabrics, but we're gonna do our best. One thing that you notice if you zoom in is that the black and red fabrics are scrappy, which is great. So I can use all my little pieces of black and red. Let's get started. I've pulled a variety of my reds, all different tone reds. Most of these are scraps, except these up here are yardage. I'm gonna try and use my scraps first. It would be great if I could do the whole thing with just these scraps, really use up my reds. Then I've also pulled my blacks. I don't have a lot of scrap blacks, so I'm pretty much using yardage. Now, these are gonna be the checkerboard, the black and red checkerboard blocks. Every other block is kind of this gray color. If you look at the picture, I don't really have something exactly like that gray, but I do have this piece here, and it has kind of a similar feel to what is in the picture. I think that's what is in the quilt that Beth has wrapped around her. So that, I just want to make sure that there's a nice amount of contrast between this fabric and the blacks. Let's start making the checkerboard blocks. Here I have the red and black fabric that I'm going to work with first. I'm going to cut 3 strips of the black and 3 strips of the red, each 2.5 inches wide. It doesn't really matter how long your strips are. You just want them to be as similar in size as possible. You can see here, my black is going to be a little bit longer than my red. My red doesn't quite meet the top, but that's okay. I have 3 strips of red and 3 strips of black here. I'm going to sew this black to this red. I'm going to sew this black to this red. Then this one I'm not going to sew yet. That's very important. Do not sew these 2 together. I'll put them right sides together. And sew 1/4 inch down this seam for both. I have my pieces sewn together. Now for this one, I have a little bit of an extra tail of the black, so I'm just going to cut that off. This will go in my crumb box. And then I'll open it up, give it a nice iron. I'll do the same with this one. This one has a little bit longer red piece on it. Now I'm going to take my 2 pieces that I haven't sewn to anything, and I'm going to put the black one, so we'll put both of these going the same way. I'll put the black one onto one of them, and then the red one onto the other. So this one will go red, black, red, and this one will go black, red, black. Sew these right sides together along this seam. Same with this one, right sides together along the seam. I now have my 2 strip sets, each having 3 strips. I'm going to take the first one and I'm going to trim this to be a 90-degree angle. So I've lined up the top of my strip with the yellow line, and I'll cut on this yellow line coming down here, lining up my ruler with that yellow line. Now for the rest of my pieces, I'm going to turn this over. And for the rest of my cuts, I'm going to use my ruler. So I'm going to go 1, 2.5. Here's the half mark, 1, 2.5. Lining that half mark up with the edge of my strip. And I'll cut 2.5 inch strips all the way to the end of my strip set. I have my stack here, and now I'll do the exact same thing for this other strip set. So now I have a stack of each of these. I'm going to start laying them out in the way that my blocks will be. So I have one with the black on both sides, then one with the red on both sides, and then one with the black. And I'll see how many of these I can get. I can get 3 full ones and then a half one. I have these ones left over because for each block, you only need 1 of the red and 2 of the black. So I have reds left over. If you zoom in on that quilt, what you'll notice is for each of the 9 patches, not all the reds and the blacks in each 9 patch are the same. So sometimes they are all the same within a block, but other times the reds or the blacks will be a little bit different. So as you can see here, I have a lot of the ones with the reds, as I mentioned, just because you use more of the black, red, black than you use the red, black, red. So I have a lot of the red, black, reds left, and I will now create just some strips of the black, red, black, and then pair them with these. I've sewn some of the 9 patches together here. And then I have this one that still needs an extra row, which is where this one will come in. So I will cut this one into the 2.5 inch sections, just like I did before. And then I can use that, because as I mentioned, this can be scrappy. They don't have to all be the same red, but I'll use that to fill in some of the gaps of these ones that are all red on the outside. Your 9 patch should now measure 6.5 inches square. Once you have a bunch of these, and I'm not exactly sure how many I'm gonna make, but I'll let you know in a minute. But once you have a bunch of these, you're gonna want to alternate your 9 patch with a 6.5 inch square. I am gonna use this fabric, as I mentioned. I think that's gonna work well. So I cut a bunch of these 6.5 inch squares, and they will alternate just like this. So once you have your 9 patches and your 6.5 inch squares, you're gonna sew right sides together 1/4 inch along the seam. It doesn't matter which seam you sew it along. If you sew it along the bottom, you open it up and you can just rotate it however you want. But you're gonna put them right sides together and just sew across one of the seams. At that point, you'll end up with a bunch of these pairs. Once you have the pairs, you'll rotate one so that you're starting to create kind of this checkerboard here. You have the checkerboard here, and then you have the bigger checkerboard. You're gonna sew these right sides together, 1/4 inch, and then you'll have a bunch of 4 patches. This is now a 4 patch, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I will tell you in a minute how many 4 patches you need. The quilt top is finished. I think it looks awesome. There are 10 rows down, 10 rows across. I don't usually make square quilts, but I only had enough of this gray fabric. I used every little tiny last bit of this gray fabric, and I just had enough to get this 10 by 10. So this is where it's gonna stay. I have 50 of these gray squares and 50 of the 9 patch squares. I got this flannel, this herringbone flannel for the backing. I got this at Fat Quarter Shop. So that will be really nice and cozy for the back. I am going to make my quilt sandwich and then use pearl cotton thread to stitch on the diagonal. I'll stitch through all of these black squares on the diagonal, and then I'll stitch through the gray, bigger squares. And I think what I'm going to do, which could be super cool, is add a little tied piece in the middle of each gray square, a tied black and red yarn. So stay tuned for that. I have made my quilt sandwich. I attached these clips that I got at the Fat Quarter Shop. I've removed most of the clips because I'm done with the majority of the quilting at this point. I've also put the binding on. So I sewed my 2.5 inch binding to the front of the quilt, and then I'll flip it over and I'll use my binding clips to tack this binding down along the back, and then I'll hand stitch that shut. So I'm almost done with the actual quilting on the front. You can see I quilted the diagonal lines through all of these 6.5 inch, these are now 6 inch blocks, using this pearl cotton thread, and surprisingly this kind of goldy, almost greenish color blended the best. So that's what I used here. And then I used black. Actually, I don't think there's a quilting line here yet. No, there's not. Is there one going the other direction? No. Here you go. Here's the black. So you can see I just went, again, right on the diagonal right up this way, and then I'll do another quilting line going this way. You can probably see the quilting better from the back. Yeah, you can see that grid there that's almost done. You can see there's a missing line here, but the grid is primarily done. This black is flannel, so it's nice and soft. The back is flannel, the binding is flannel, and then the front is the traditional quilting cotton. I now have my piece completely quilted. I have my binding sewn on here. This is just a black flannel, and then, as I mentioned, the backing is flannel as well, so it's nice and soft. I have added these black and red ties onto the middle of each of these squares, every other square. I think they're kind of cool. They're just yarn. Here, you can get a closer look here. So this is just yarn that I got at Walmart, and then I tied it off. I left them pretty long. I'm probably gonna cut them down, but I wanna wash this and see what happens to the ties, because they might get kind of all knotted and scrunched up in kind of a cool looking way, in which case I'll leave them, or if they look kind of shabby, I'll just clip it off, and I think that will look nice just to have a small little tie in the middle of each of these squares. So let's give it a nice wash and see what we think. The quilt is all washed, and honestly, these little puffs didn't come out the way that I hoped that they would. I was hoping that they'd get a little bit more tangled up, but they actually ended up kind of just really silky and smooth, actually, like actual hair, kind of strange. So I am gonna cut these pretty short. Let's see, maybe if I measure my fingers to the top of my fingers there. Something like that. So I'll do that for all of these little puffs. Here's the finished quilt. I think it is awesome. I think those little puffs are just perfect in the middle of each one of those alternating blocks. The scrappy red and black 9 patches add a really unique feel to this piece. It's geometric, but kind of old school, really successful. Thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.